There's a scene from Princess Mononoke that got me thinking. It started off as just an interesting observation as Ashitaka, who had gone captured by a hateful curse, was in need of help. Princess Mononoke herself takes him deep into the forest in order to heal him. The spirit of the forest comes alive within his dreams, and Ashitaka wakes up the next morning to the sounds of the forest. And at this point, what had piqued my interest had now turned into a revelation. So I thought to myself, have I not seen this before? And as a matter of fact, I know I have, in the other Ghibli films. So the premise is simple. A character feeling sick moves away to seek comfort in nature, and by the time we get to reflect on the story, they are healed in some type of way. And I know this sounds like an obvious thing that you might have felt while watching at least one of the Ghibli films. After all, things like conservation is a core concept of the way Studio Ghibli creates these immersive stories. But I think there's more here. I think there's a deeper understanding to be extracted from not only one of their works. In fact, it might just be something that permeates the framework of the entire studio itself. I would like to present to you the Ghibli Healing theory. To understand this theory better, we need to get to one of the core philosophies of Studio Ghibli. I think there's a different way to interpret the love and care that Ghibli has for all things natural. We normally hear people saying how Ghibli films are environmental, the way the stories are portrayed. They teach you a thing or two about conservation. And while I'd be inclined to agree with a statement like that for the most part, I think it won't be a complete statement. It would only paint half the picture. You see, conservation is imbued within these paintings, that's for sure. But the whole picture takes the shape of a rather symbiotic form of living. It's not just conservation that Studio Ghibli strives for, but rather it is coexistence. And maybe that's why this theory makes sense, for we are part of nature as much as nature is a part of us. But I think I'll get there eventually, because before that, I want to test the validity of this premise while exploring the whole Ghibli catalog. Out of the 23 feature films that Studio Ghibli has made since the beginning, more than half of them portray this premise in some type of way. It could materialize as a physiological form of healing, or it could be something completely psychological, sometimes even stretching to be metaphysical in shape. And I want to begin with perhaps the most conspicuous manifestation of this theory, something that looks obvious on first viewing. In the movie When Marnie Was There, a 12-year-old girl Anna lives with asthma. She struggles within the crowded city, and as a result, the asthma attacks take a toll on her both physically and mentally. And this is something the movie shows you at the very beginning. And the narrative is set in motion as her stepmother sends her away into the countryside to live with her aunt and uncle. And as her mother waves goodbye, the line specifically states, "The air is very clean where they live. It'll help your condition to spend some time there." And there is a shot about 10 minutes into the movie where this very statement is proven to be true. When Anna opens the balcony to catch a glimpse of the environment she was now part of, you see her crack a smile for the first time. She takes in a deep breath and says, "This feels nice." And over the course of the film, there are moments of highs and lows for this protagonist. But at the end of the film, Anna seems to be happy, and although it isn't explicitly stated, her asthma seemed to have calmed down, as we see Anna both physically and mentally healed through her getaway to the countryside. The narrative doesn't bother describing the effect that nature had on Anna, but is rather portrayed in the way Anna spends time outside the house, exploring the natural world around her. In Princess Mononoke, the healing aspect of nature is manifested as a spirit. You have an injured character being taken deep into a mysterious forest to be healed. It's a rather magical form of healing, but nonetheless, it is nature that heals Ashitaka. It all feels like a sequence from a dream. But when he wakes up, the world portrayed around him is one that has chirping birds and the sound of the flowing water and dragonflies roaming around him. Now, is there a fantastical element to all of this? Yes, I agree. But portraying a frame such as this, a character nestled within the heart of the forest, it clearly shows an intention to remind you of the restorative property of nature. And in doing that, you stumble across terms like biophilia, which is something that I had talked about in one of my earlier videos about nature. It is the instinctive quality of humans to find comfort within nature. And although it sounds like a poetic word that was devised from a spiritual perspective, its implications have been vastly studied and identified from an academic point of view as well. And it is here where we come across theories like the stress recovery theory, postulated by the environmental psychologist Roger Ulrich. In a pioneering study that he conducted with patients recovering from surgery, the patients who were exposed to windows with natural landscapes recovered at a faster rate than the ones who were exposed to urban landscapes, from which he concluded that nature had a positive restorative effect on the human body, which is connected to evolutionary psychology. We have co-evolved with nature, and therefore in times of need, we strive for coexistence with it. It is purely a product of biological evolution. And this is something that is fairly obvious when you glance across the Ghibli stories. And I'm not saying that this is carried out in a formulaic manner. It could not be any further from it. But it's the level of understanding that you attain once you develop a connection with the environment yourself. It comes from a place of wisdom, if you even want to call it that. In the secret world of Arrietty, Sho is a young boy who moves away to a natural environment while he awaits surgery for a heart condition. And similar to that of Anna, Sho is uninspired and lethargic, and he struggles to make friends because of his illness. But in the movie, the manifestation of nature is in fact the protagonist Arrietty. The little people called borrowers are not necessarily humans, but they're kind of a different species. But just like how interacting with animals is known to reduce your cortisol levels, it's a similar concept that's applied here, but only with an element of added fiction. He finds Arrietty fascinating, and it's their interactions that gives him a new lease of life. And by the end of the film, he now has hope as Arrietty gives him her hair clip for good fortune. And of course, we don't know what the future holds for Sho, nor do we know if he gets healed. But at this very moment, his face is that of a person who is inspired by the natural world around him. In My Neighbor Totoro, when a family member is diagnosed with tuberculosis, they move to the countryside to seek this comforting side of nature. And although the mother's illness is something that's portrayed in the background, the implication of how nature affects people's health is an underlying aspect of the plot. The spirits, the giant camphor tree, the natural exploration, these are all agents of healing for the characters involved in the story. But healing can also be of the mind. It's often said that walking in nature or even spending time in a garden is a good way to reduce the stress induced by the modernized lives that we live. In a study that was conducted on stress reduction based on the varying levels of nature, 3 different recreational sites were chosen. Site A, a hiking trail winding through a forest with ravines and wild trees, a complete natural landscape. Site B, a semi-natural setting in the form of a public park with areas for gatherings and playgrounds for casual recreation. And Site C, an indoor exercise facility with a running track and gym that forms the urban-built landscape. The cortisol levels of the people who visited the 3 sites were measured before and after their visit. After analyzing the results, the study showed that the location with the highest level of nature had the most impact on stress reduction, with visitors to the natural landscape reporting significantly less cortisol levels to that of the urban counterparts. And such studies have been done over and over again in different countries under different settings and circumstances that prove that nature has an everlasting impact on the well-being of humans. And maybe this is why you feel a certain type of way while watching the deliberate plots of Studio Ghibli, where a character runs away to nature to reduce the stress that they find themselves in. And one of my favorite examples of this is the plot of Kiki's Delivery Service, a coming-of-age story of a young witch who travels to the city in hopes of living the urban life. When you are a kid, there's always an emphasis on wanting to grow up quickly so that you can have autonomy or even a sense of freedom. And this is something that Kiki herself expects as she moves away to the city. But unfortunately, she quickly realizes that being an adult is difficult. Maintaining jobs and having responsibilities is too much to take in for a 13-year-old. And there's a point in the story when Kiki looks completely depressed. she has mentally checked out, and under that state of mind, she loses her magical abilities. And the solution that is offered at this point is basically to take a break from the mundane. Kiki travels to the countryside to get inspired once again, a breath of fresh air, life in a cabin in the woods, a walk within the forest. These are the things that inspires Kiki. These are the things that heals her mind. And I was reading Hayao Miyazaki's book called Turning Point, essentially a compilation of interviews, and I couldn't help but notice a few similarities between the plot of Kiki and a section from this book. I have a mountain cabin, and when I have time, I go there alone. There's no mistaking that going into the forest is extremely good for my mental health. After spending some time there, I become kinder to others, perhaps because I begin to long for people. At my mountain cabin, I cook meals, wash clothes, cut wood, wash the windows, take walks. My days are a repetition of these activities. Walking on the same road each day, the landscape I see can seem entirely new depending on the shafts of light and the way the wind blows. I'm always discovering new things. In any event, it's better to have contact with nature even if you have to force yourself to make time for it. If you keep making the excuse that you're too busy, it will never happen. Many people think that they'll get into nature when they retire, but it's much better to make it a habit while you're still young and healthy. And I'm not saying that this scene in Kiki's delivery service is completely inspired by Hayao Miyazaki's lifestyle. I don't even know the order of these events to be quite sure of it, but the thing that I'm confident about is the philosophy here. This is a story about a person who is stressed out because of our modernized lifestyles, a way of life that's detached from our instinctive psychological necessities. And it's only when she reconnects with nature that her mental well-being is reinstated, something that Miyazaki would want the modern world to do more of. From a distance, I completely acknowledge the fact that Howl's Moving Castle is a story about the pointlessness of war. Miyazaki has often depicted his disdain for war in general, and it is indeed the bigger picture of this film. But if you can bring it down to a subjective level, it's also a story of self-love and acceptance. And there are true moments of reflection that are fundamentally human, but such moments of introspection are all accompanied by elements of nature. There's a shot when Sophie is sitting in a natural landscape and staring into the distance. And when she cries, she does so in the rain. And this is not particularly an obvious implication of the premise, but in the film, Sophie is initially not happy about her life within the city. She is insecure about her looks, and she seems to get by in a world that lives in fear of war. But after she gets cursed by the witch, she embarks on a journey of self-discovery, and in the process, making the lives of the people around her a bit better. And it feels like as the story progresses, nature is embedded into the storyline as a reminder of how therapeutic it can be, even in times of great uncertainties. It might not be a direct application of this theory, but it holds value here nonetheless. In Porco Rosso, Marco is an ex-fighter pilot turned bounty hunter who takes the shape of a pig, and although the pig is defined as a curse within the film, it's often interpreted by the viewers that Porco might be suffering from survivor's guilt. The trauma of losing his friends is something that he has to live with, but the fact that he remains a pig shows that he hasn't completely come to terms with it. But having seen the uglier side of war, he runs away from his duties. Hayao Miyazaki selected a remote island in the Adriatic Sea as Porco's hideout. The film begins with clouds floating over his head, his plane parked in the lovely blue waters of the Adriatic, the radio playing some Italian music in the ambience. Miyazaki could have chosen a nice city as the perfect getaway for Porco, but this character hasn't fully healed, and as such, he gives him time to reflect on his life within a natural landscape. Something that he might have done so himself if he were in Marco's place. But from a different director's perspective, maybe things might look a bit different, you might think. But judging by the fact that Isao Takahata was also someone who explored the natural world in his films, the healing theory is also quite relevant with his catalog of films. You see, Takahata was perhaps more concerned about the human condition than Hayao Miyazaki. His films depicting scenes that test the emotional endurance of the average viewer. The wars are portrayed to be merciless. The women are portrayed to suffer great injustice. His world is a depiction of the real world, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't understand nature. In The Tale of Princess Kaguya, a story based on a Japanese fairy tale, Princess Kaguya is a princess from the moon who manifests as a little girl within a bamboo stalk. She is quite literally an extension of nature, and as a result of that, she struggles within the city. Everything about it, from the people who constantly judge her to the overbearing pressure of marriage, and quite simply a toxic environment, breaks her spirit. And there's a scene where she runs away from the city, leaving behind her fancy clothes to the world that she once knew, only to realize later that it was a dream. But this is played as a key motif in realizing this character. Every time she is within nature, she is happy and overjoyed, as if that's where she belongs. But contrast that to the life within the city, it slowly destroys her soul. And at the end, there is a scene where she is liberated within the presence of nature, even for a moment before she has to leave the planet. She is healed by the natural world around her. In Whisper of the Heart, which slowly turned into one of my favorite Ghibli films, is honestly not a story about conservation or any of the like. This is a very human story, a story about what it means to be an artist, what it is that truly makes you create. It's difficult to overlook this overarching motif to focus on the aspects of nature, but still, it is impossible to not see the traces of it at regular intervals. Even when Shizuku finds the rustic shop, it is sort of hidden away in one of the quieter parts of the city. And then there is the view from the balcony. It's no wonder an inspiring place for the creative mind. And at the end of the film, Shizuku and Seiji visit a secret viewpoint. As the sun rises through the mist, it creates this ethereal moment in time as the golden rays of the sun outlines everything that it touched. And more than just a beautiful view, this ending is about a clarity of thought. It's not surprising that a lot of creative minds throughout history considered nature to be their muse. It has this unadulterated quality to it that once consumed makes people lose it. Creative blocks have often vanished in its presence, and I think there's a similar motif that's being reproduced here. Throughout the film, they're both uncertain about their futures, and as creative people, it's a state of mind that results in creative blocks and even mental health struggles. But nonetheless, this moment at the end, as the sun rises in front of them, it also depicts a new beginning. Here, there is clarity about their future, and I like how subtle this is. It doesn't value itself any more than the characters within the story, but it only bears witness to two people finally finding their sense of calling in life. In The Boy and the Heron, Mahito is a young boy who lost his mother in the air raids of Tokyo. The fires are traumatic nightmares for him, but the narrative takes him away to the countryside where his mother grew up. And while settling in, he finds a tower that takes him away to another world where he reunites with a younger version of his mother. But this adventure is one that eventually helps him deal with his trauma, one that allows him to understand the nature of life itself. And the representation of nature here is fantastical. It's not your typical Ghibli film with sprawling forests and mountains that portrays a slice of the real world. It's more abstract and perhaps even a metaphor for heaven. But nonetheless, nature is ever present here. The entire journey itself could have even manifested within the protagonist as an elaborate dream sequence. But at the end, while the family is about to return back to Tokyo, one can acknowledge that this fantastical distraction had healed him. In Only Yesterday, the whole narrative is a love letter to the Japanese countryside. While the world is moving ever faster into the future, the green rice fields and the rolling hills remains a reminder of simpler times. It is that inevitable longing that you feel while watching the landscapes of Studio Ghibli. In many ways, I think the protagonist Taiko is perhaps the exact opposite of Kiki. While one of them is quite young and can't wait to leave the countryside behind her, the other is much older, and after having endured the stress of city life, she longs for the simple life in the countryside. But in your typical Ghibli fashion, both stories reach the same conclusion about nature and its healing capacity. In this story, Taiko could never fulfill the desires of her inner child. Her 10-year-old self was always denied opportunities to be different. Although her life was portrayed to be normal with a standard family, there was something missing in her life. It almost felt like being different was somehow a problem. And although we don't really know how deeply such things affected her, I think there's enough reason to believe that she moved to Tokyo to fulfill a standard. But really, she doesn't want to live that life, something that we realize as the story progresses. And alongside the people she meets there, it is the environment that captures her emotions. And there's even a scene that literally depicts this premise. Farmers can't exist without nature, so they always taken great care to give her a helping hand in return. A collaboration between man and nature. That's the heart of country life. That's why I feel so at home. I didn't grow up here, but somehow always felt that my soul was at home here. And at the end, Taiko decides to not go back to the city, and in many ways, this escape to the countryside heals her inner child. But yet, there is another iteration of this theory that I'd like to present to you. Something that is much more abstract than mental health and physiological well-being. If you blur the lines of this theory a little bit, there is room for some metaphysical interpretations as well. Take for instance the plot of Castle in the Sky. It's a fairly obvious storyline that involves people getting kidnapped and elements of fantasy and science fiction. But an underlying theme would point to the way technology is used in the story for both good and evil. Laputa was once an advanced civilization, a place that was more technologically advanced than any other. But an overdependence on mechanization alleviated their vitality, and upon realizing this loss of humanity, some of them left behind their technology to return back to Earth, while the others probably perished over time due to some kind of illness. But the real question here is what has become of the technology that they had left behind. For one, the castle is still floating in the sky, but much of what it once was is completely taken over by nature. The robots that were once used as machines of war and destruction have now taken a liking for the birds and the flowers. Normally, mechanization is almost always against the maintenance of nature, but here, in the absence of the human programmers, Miyazaki wonders if they have now grown to have a soul. And this is an extension of what you might come across in the real world. Maybe not necessarily robots, but places that are abandoned by humanity are almost always taken over by nature. Just take a look at the state of the Chernobyl nuclear facility. If you go back 40 years, this was a place largely inhabited by humans. But then a disaster strikes, and the people are forced to flee their land. And although the whole surrounding area, now referred to as the Chernobyl exclusion zone, is thought to be this post-apocalyptic world lost to the passage of time, from a rather different perspective, it is a sanctum for all things natural. This nuclear wasteland is not degraded, but in fact, it is teeming with all forms of life. It's a testament to the healing capacity of nature. It finds a way, even in the bleakest of times. In Castle in the Sky, nature taking over is not necessarily seen as a bad thing, but it is seen as an inevitable course of life. The healing aspect of nature is more abstract here. Have technology that were always considered to be the antithesis of nature now grown to have a soul to care for it? Has nature healed the machine? In Spirited Away, this abstract extension of the theory takes the shape of overconsumption. Almost all of the references are shaped by humanity's greed to keep wanting more of the good stuff. Initially, Chihiro's parents are turned into pigs. And according to Miyazaki, I frankly wasn't trying to make some sort of ironic point by turning the parents in Spirited Away into pigs, because they really were like pigs. There were lots of people like that during Japan's economic bubble years and after. They're still around today. There are brand name pigs and rare item snob pigs. You see, Japan had an insane bubble economy in the 80s, classified by exuberant spending practices and a lifestyle of great abundance, only to be referred by economists as an extended party economy. But the bubble did burst in 1991, and the country stooped down into an economic recession. But the frenzied lifestyles did continue even after, as portrayed by the insatiable nature of Chihiro's parents. Even the luxuries of the bathhouse and the people who work there are all subject to this overconsumption. When the spirit No-Face walks into the bathhouse, it turns into a frenzy of who could obtain the most wealth. But the sad reality is, No-Face turns into a monster, a byproduct of the environment that he now resides in. But the solution here is simple. For Miyazaki, the world is at a tipping point of consumerism. According to him, I believe our present mass consumption civilization is so overstrained that we may have reached the point where we have to violently discard it, bracing ourselves for the possibility that we may lose everything in the process. And when you see No-Face escaping the bathhouse, he vomits the things that he had consumed, and all of a sudden, No-Face is back to his normal self again. No-Face was in a toxic environment which made him act like a monster, but once he is in the presence of a natural landscape, he is a calmer entity. Even the first shot of the spirit world is this abandoned theme park. Just like I mentioned before with Chernobyl, this is a direct representation of nature taking back the land that we took from it to feed our growing consumerism. But all of a sudden, in the post-bubble economy, we have no use for it and it remains abandoned, but now overgrown by nature. And for Miyazaki, it's not that an amusement park is considered to be a bad thing in general, but here it's about what it symbolizes. In many ways, the healing effect of nature remains at a distance. It's a simple gesture to let go of the greed and insatiable desires, and in doing that, maybe we would all touch grass one day. And even some of the other films that I haven't mentioned here also takes time to appreciate this quality of nature whenever necessary. In Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind or The Wind Rises, there are moments of inspiration and therapeutic restoration that is derived straight from being within nature. And look, if these were not intentional, just filler shots that add nothing to the story, I don't think the motif would be so recurrent throughout the stories. They wouldn't be memorable, and the dialogue wouldn't even try to focus on the point. But the natural world of Ghibli is memorable. It elicits powerful emotions, and a lot of us consume them to relax our minds from the stresses that exist around us. The world is changing, and it is happening pretty fast. And as we keep up the pace, we do so while damaging our health. But watching a Ghibli film is like a reminder of the bond that we have with nature. So the next time you feel stressed out, or even when you're recovering from an injury, maybe spend some time in nature. Go for a walk or a picnic, or even lay in the grass in your backyard. Because according to Studio Ghibli, that should help you heal.